Okay. Hello. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS office hours, hopefully. I am on a reinstalled setup here, so hopefully everything works. It would be really nice if somebody could say that they hear me or they see me or something like that. I am live. Hey. Um, Hey, Tobias. Hey, Kenneth. Thank you, Kenneth, for joining the Yak Herd. Very, very nice. Tobias, I am alone today again, yes. And I'm on a reinstalled computer where everything is slightly wrong, which I underestimated how much work I had to do to get it ready for streaming. But we are live. My second monitor does not work. Anyways, we'll make it work. So it is Friday once again, and that's when we do SerenityOS office hours. So if you are new to the stream, this is where we talk about SerenityOS and the surrounding projects like Ladybird and Yuct. And everything around it, like programming, things like that. Unexplored is asking, did you create a separate partition for my home folder? I did not do that. I went with the old one big partition because, I don't know. I used to do many partitions, but as I got older, I got tired of messing around with my install, and I just want things to be simple. Merry Christmas, says Karudo. Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to everybody, in fact. That is such an oversight. I should obviously have worn a Christmas hat. Sorry about that. Now we are back on track. All right. So, yeah, I got the new computer stuff yesterday, and since then it's just been a bit of a scramble to make things work again. But the good news is that the new setup is very, very fast. So that is lovely. I can build Serenity in 2 minutes, or Ladybird in 2 minutes, and Serenity in just over 3, which is fantastic. So it's like twice as fast as before. This is a 5950X setup, so one of these thingers, and it is, I have to say, very fast, very quiet. So that is real nice. Tobias says, how long for a full rebuild can you demonstrate? Well, I could, but I think the streaming software will probably fall apart if I do that. So I'm a little bit not eager to do it while streaming. And I'm still struggling to get my video card working. So that's why I only have the one screen, because I'm using the built-in GPU right now. So things like that. I guess I don't do many PC build type things. So every time I peek into this world, I always feel like I'm a bit of a stranger to it all. Tobias says he'll wait for a video and marvel at the speed then. Yes. Indeed. So I think the speed from the computer is not the only thing. I also have my ice cream cluster that I'm running at home. So, oops, not Ice Moon, Ice Mon. And I now have 2 computers connected to it, which can do 20 and 32 jobs individually. And then I'm going to try to get a third computer with some of the old parts together, so I can have 3 machines. That would be real nice. Be able to do something like 64 compile jobs at the same time. IceMon is a monitor for the software called Ice Cream, which is a distributed compiler thing. So Ice Cream, that was not not a good enough search. Ice Cream is a distributed compiler with a central scheduler. So basically it allows you to use multiple computers to compile code for you. So if you have like two computers and they're both on, and then you can work on one computer, but you can sort of send compile jobs to the second computer automatically if you just set this thing up. And some people like distcc, which is another implementation of the same idea. I got used to using Ice Cream back when I worked at Nokia, so I've kind of stuck with it. And it is fantastic. It basically almost cuts compile times in half if you throw an equivalent computer at it, and it's pretty scalable. So when I worked at Nokia, we would have an Ice Cream cluster in the office with like 30-40 machines available, and it was sort of by connecting to the cluster, you would also participate and let other people compile on your machine, and it was just really, really nice. It made stuff that should take hours to build in minutes instead. So as the SerenityOS codebase continues to grow, I think it's kind of a unfortunate necessity to employ more sophisticated tools like this if you want to do faster, bigger builds. And but it's only one of the many angles that we should improve, of course. I think it's also important to try to make each individual component have a smaller or a shorter build time in the ways that we can affect that. And also you can use our component configuration system to sort of deselect things that you don't care about, that you don't need to build for whatever you're working on. So there are multiple different ways to affect the build time. Unexplored says, so it's like a compiler farm. Yes, exactly. It's like a compiler farm. Hasib Q says, does it hook into CMake? It doesn't really. The way that I run it is I use a Ccache prefix. So basically, our CMake system for Serenity is set up to put Ccache in front of the compiler. So we're already using Ccache to build a local cache on my disk of things that I've compiled before. And if I try to compile the exact same thing again, it will just fetch it from cache. This is absolutely vital for fast incremental builds. And I think we even make you install it by default if you follow our build instructions. So ICC, I inject it as a prefix to Ccache, which means that Ccache takes care of spawning ICC whenever something is not available in cache. But all of these things like Ccache and ICC, distcc, all of them sort of act as, I guess you could say, like wrappers around the compile command. So I think you can invoke them in any order, like Ccache, ICC, distcc, gcc, and they will each like add their little bit of magic and then exec the next thing in the chain, I think. But I haven't tried to chain both distcc and ICC, so I don't know. I don't know what would actually happen if you try to distribute against or across like two different types of farms. Tobias says, could you put Ice Cream into the cloud if you had copious amounts of money to spare, or would the network delay negate all benefits? That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure, honestly. The network latency is an issue, but at the same time, like if you have a sophisticated enough build system that is able to sort of throw out a lot of compile jobs without bottlenecking on, for example, a link task. So if you want to build Serenity, in theory, you can build like a whole lot of object files without choking on a single link, right? And if CMake is smart enough to not serialize the build, but instead like throw out all those object jobs, then the network latency becomes less of an issue. But at some point you have to bottleneck on a link. That's just the nature of builds, right? But I think it should be possible to get some power out of even a slow network connection to a compile farm. And at least ICC definitely has tools to improve or to decrease the amount of data that gets sent. So I know they have like LZO compression. I think that's on by default. And they also do stuff like you can do stuff like pre-processing locally before you send it over the wire, but you can also do remote pre-processing. But there are some caveats with that, and it can like break in some configurations. So I think I had to turn it off at some point because when I would do remote pre-processing, then it would break because something happened on the remote that didn't happen locally. But in theory, there are lots of ways to improve performance in like wide network situations. But it's not something I've experimented with. A bunch of people, like whenever I talk about ice cream and distributed compiles, somebody always pops up and says like, hey, let's build a cluster of cloud servers to do this for Serenity contributors. And I think that would be a cool thing to do, but it's not really like my cup of tea to mess with stuff like that. But if somebody feels like taking that sort of project to the next level, then go for it. Let's see. Slothseas says, talking about compilers, are there any goals of including a compiler in the base system? At the moment, no. We don't really have a goal of that, but if you think about the long-term goals, we are building a language. So we're building the Yacht language, and if that works out, which is, still to be determined, but like if that works out as we make a language and it turns out to be a better language than C++ for building the software we're building, then yeah, of course it will come with the base system. So there's definitely a thread where that happens, but Yacht needs to prove itself first, of course. Let's see. Mr. Bill was asking about C++ modules, and Andrew Castor says C++ modules wouldn't help this much. Yeah, I guess that wouldn't really. Oh, Tobias is saying something offensive. Oh my goodness, Tobias, you can't just refer to parts of your anatomy like that on YouTube, but I'm gonna let it slide. I love that you can, since I have the chat on screen, you can see sort of the moderation anyway. So it kind of defeats the purpose of the automatic filtering. I wonder, by the way, like that's a pretty restrictive filter to not let you say that. And Tobias was referring to his rear end and having a reason to get off of it. Let's see. Peter says, while learning programming, was there any part you struggled to wrap your head around? Yeah, absolutely. There were always different parts during different stages while I was learning. Of course, it was a long time ago now. Like I started learning programming in the late 80s as a kid. But whenever I would encounter something new or like take on something new, like a new language or a new development environment, I would always choke on something for a while or struggle. And early on, I remember, for example, struggling a lot with when I was getting into Visual Basic. I remember struggling a lot to understand how to call Win32 APIs because Visual Basic had a way that you could sort of declare extern C APIs. And there were a lot of code examples where they would use bitBLT, if you're familiar. Like it's like a bitblitting, a fast paint function. And I remember copy pasting so many examples, like in Visual Basic, calling out to like GDI or whatever part of Win32 it was. And I just could never understand how that stuff actually worked. And I couldn't build a mental model. And of course, I understand now that it was because I never even saw C code at that point. But I remember it felt like such a struggle at the time. Because they were telling me like, oh, you just got to call GDI and here's how you declare an extern GDI function and here's how you call it. And I just didn't get it. And I think that was sort of a typical thing that happened a lot in the 90s, where because of low information availability, you ended up sort of just taking things at face value. So like somebody would tell you, oh, this is how you do XYZ. And you had no real way to do a deep dive on how that thing worked. So you just kind of took their word for it, copy pasted it. And at least I was like that. Like I had a whole library of tricks that I knew how to do, but I didn't understand how they worked. And it's kind of strange thinking back on that, because nowadays we have such high information availability, and even if I don't have access to the source code for something, like I also know how to reverse engineer. I mean, I'm not great at that, but I know a little bit. But yeah, that was always an issue when I was learning, and I'm really, really happy for the people who are learning programming for the first time today with access to the internet and all the great resources. And I think like the kids growing up now who develop an interest in programming, they're going to be so far ahead of people like me who grew up in the 90s when they're my age, or at least that's what it seems like to me, because they just have that native access to information. This is really cool. Anyway, let's see. Oi18 says, I just want to say the Fix Me videos are super cool. Well, thank you for saying that. I definitely had a good time making them. I was looking at the list of them. It was like I had made 19 at this point, I think. And it really became like the thing of the season, the advent of Fix Me, which was not even intentional, but that's sort of what happened. I have to admit, at this point, I need to do something else other than just Fix Me videos. I'm gonna keep the format, but I have to make other types of content as well, because I feel like since I've been doing these Fix Me videos, while I've been making a lot of videos and evidently people enjoy the videos, I have also felt like I'm not really making as much progress on the project as I want to. I'm like painting in like these little mistakes in the house painting, but I have parts of the house that I need to work on actually building out as well. So I do need to scale that back a little bit, but I think it's been a success in many ways. Like I got some nice things fixed, and I got to work on new parts of the code base, and more importantly though, I got other people excited about fixing Fix-Me's, and I guess increased general community awareness of Fix-Me's, which has been fantastic. It's been really good to see so many people picking up random technical debt and just trying to improve the situation. But yeah, like going forward, it would probably be not like 14 Fix-Me's in a month, but like maybe 2 or 3 or something like that would be a better number. We'll see. Super Boney the Cat says, hello, the best Christmas since 1999. Well, I guess I don't disagree with you, although, I mean, it's not that 1999 was a great Christmas in some particular way, but like it is definitely the best Christmas. So I agree with the first part. Every Christmas is the best Christmas. The second part you're gonna have to explain, I think. Let's see. The literal definition of bruh says, why can't the compiler fit the padding automatically? I remember in one of your recent videos you had to manually rearrange the struct members. So I guess the issue there is that because of ABI requirements, like a struct declared a certain way is expected to look a certain way in memory. And if one compiler would decide, hey, I'm going to go ahead and pack this in a better way, it would be great as long as you're using only that compiler with those specific optimization settings and that version of the compiler. But as soon as you try to link with code that was built in a different way, the memory layouts of structs would not match up anymore, and you would have breakage because of that. So I think that's sort of the main reason that it can't be done, because it's just mandated, I think, by ABI, by the ABI standard. I'm not sure actually what level of the standardization specifies struct layout, because I haven't looked into it, but there would be compatibility issues. And it's kind of interesting to think about when designing a new language, that like you want to make sure you don't paint yourself into an unnecessary corner like that, knowing what we know today. Let's see. Thomas Q says, I got a review on my PR suggesting something, but I don't know how to do what was suggested. What should I do? I would recommend speaking with the person who left you the review that you don't understand how to action, and you'll find them on Discord most likely. So just if ever anybody asks you to do something, I mean, assuming this is Serenity related, if somebody asks you to do something and you don't know what that means, just ask them on Discord to if they can clarify. And people are pretty available, I would say, especially if somebody asks about something like this. I can't imagine that you wouldn't get a response. Let's see. Tobias says that he started programming with Java. That is, that's nice, isn't it? I had a friend who was really into Java when I was a teenager. He was always trying to show me how cool it was, and I didn't really get it. But I mean, I still don't really get it, but back then I really didn't get it. But it seems to have worked out. Let's see. Kleines Film Version says, so far ahead, says the person writing sophisticated programs at 9 years old. I didn't even start writing programs proper till I was 15. I mean, I guess everybody has a different childhood, right? And we all discover computers at different ages. I think you do get an advantage. The earlier you engage with computers and programming in your life, you do get an advantage from that. But I do think it kind of flattens out. Like, there's not like infinity advantage. Like if you start programming as a toddler, you're not gonna be very productive. But I just think that even if you're an adult today and you start programming for the first time, you're still gonna have access to infinity more information than somebody who started as a kid in the 90s had. So I think it almost like evens the playing field in some ways. Because I've talked to a bunch of people who started programming as adults, and some of them have like this classic imposter syndrome where they feel like, oh, well, like I didn't start as a child like you did, so I'm at a huge disadvantage. But I think to some extent, it's not like it's not completely like that. What am I trying to say? There is an advantage to starting early, but there's also a huge increase in information available, and it does benefit those starting today. Anyway, Tobias says, what are your current corners of the project that you are interested to work on? Good point. A good question. I think one thing that I want to improve is the multi-core stability. So I have an itch to fix things so that Serenity can work better on multi-core CPUs. And I found some trouble the other day that will require some large refactoring. So that's something I need to dig into. And while looking at that, I also sort of, every time I look at multi-core stability, I always stumble into the thread blocking implementation in the kernel. So the thread block thing, which is a, I would say like too complicated way more complicated than it needs to be. And it's something that I would like to simplify, look for ways to simplify. And outside of that, honestly, make more websites work, I think. It's something that it brings me a lot of joy to just bring up random websites and try to improve the way they look or feel or work in our browsers. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. Oh my goodness, I'm missing so many things here. Circus Bolgan says, you've said that companies ignore the GPL and take that code without giving back. What sort of people have you seen do that? Devs, managers, C-suite? Did the lawyers know about it? Also, what kind of code do you think it makes the most sense to GPL, and what substantial amount do you think it makes the least sense to GPL? I have seen developers use GPL code without telling anybody in various situations at various places. But usually the way that would work is that somebody would just take something GPL, use it, and not tell anybody or not make a deal about it. Certainly not inform lawyers or anything like that. And I think that's something that just happens out of like practicality. Like people just do that because it's the path of least resistance for them, and then they don't tell anybody because that would create resistance. And it's not the right thing to do, but it's something that does happen. To your question, what kind of code do you think it makes the most sense to GPL? I would say no code. Personally, like I would never license anything under the GPL because I do not want to impose those types of restrictions on anybody else. And I like the idea of letting people like take code and make it into products if they want. Like if somebody can find a way to take what I do and turn it into a profitable product, then cool, let them. It doesn't bother me. Yeah, I guess that's what I think. I don't think it makes sense to GPL anything. But my ambitions in software are not the same as other people's. So if you have different let's say ideological convictions or just different goals in general with your software that you're working on, then you might find yourself sympathetic to more GPL type licenses. But I don't feel sympathetic towards them. Let's see. Jared Teaches says, there any desire to add more networking capabilities? I've been slowly adding routing protocols to a forked repo and testing it out with multiple versions of SerenityOS. Sure. I think there's absolutely desire to have more networking capabilities. Our networking capabilities in Serenity are very, let's say, limited. We can do like bare minimum TCP IP stack stuff, and we don't have any interesting capabilities really. Even within TCP, like we're missing a lot of stuff like the performance parts of TCP are largely absent, and there's a lot of money on the table, I think, in terms of networking performance for anybody who's interested in that sort of stuff. Can just go and find sort of a partially implemented network stack with lots of opportunities and low-hanging fruit. And every now and then, like somebody figures that out and realizes that they can implement basic network optimizations in Serenity, and they have a good time with that. But it seems like a pretty rare interest, or at least based on how many people do actually pick it up. But every now and then somebody comes along, and maybe you are one of those people based on what you're saying. And it would certainly be nice to have more sophisticated routing capabilities in the system. Of course, it's not really intended to obviously run as like an internet backbone server in any way, but I think there's still room for interesting protocol implementations and things like that. I mean, it depends on depends on exactly what you're doing, but yeah, I think definitely room for stuff like that. Thomas Q says, regarding that pull request, I understand what was asked. It was to use an intrusive list, but I don't know how to use it. I'm going to ask for help in Discord. Yeah, I think that's exactly the right strat. Just go ask somebody on Discord how to do it. And I'm sure that if nobody responds, I will respond because I can help you use an intrusive list. If we see more of the context. Sufi Bros says, when was the last time you tried bare metal Serenity? What would need to happen for you to try it again? I don't know. I mean, it was maybe a year ago that I tried it. What would need to happen for you to try it again? I don't know either. I don't know. I don't know. People find this strange about me sometimes, but like I'm not super interested in bare metal. I think it's cool, but I just find other parts or the other aspects of system development more interesting. Like I enjoy other levels of the stack more than the bare metal parts, and I find myself just hacking on other things. So I guess for me to try bare metal again, maybe if there's some interesting development in the bare metal parts of the system, or I have been known to randomly take an interest in random parts of the system, and that might happen at any time, of course, being random. And I guess another thing that could happen is, like, I know that people are working on the AArch64 stuff, so the ARM port, and maybe when that's a bit further along, that could be something that would be fun to try, running it on some smaller device. But yeah, it's not really my main area of interest. We have lots of people who care about bare metal, and they're doing a nice job of dragging that along, and I like other parts more, I guess. I like bare metal too, but I just like other stuff a lot more. Jared Teaches says, do you have a favorite technical book or textbook? I don't think so. I don't read a lot of books anymore. I read many books when I was younger, but it's been a long time since I read a technical book, to be honest. I think the last I did buy a technical book not too long ago. I mean, it was probably a while ago. It was one of Jason Turner's C++ books, because he had I don't know, he was telling everybody that he put out a new book. Was it maybe this one back in July? But I didn't read it yet. I'm gonna read it though, because I'm interested in what Jason is saying, but I haven't gotten to it yet. I will link to it though if anybody else is interested. Generally, I guess I like to learn by messing around rather than reading books about stuff. But I did read a lot of books like 10 years ago, and in the time before that. But at some point, I just felt like, okay, books are a very inefficient way to learn new information at this point, and it's easier to just throw myself into the pool and figure out how to swim. Let's see. Ryan Cohen says, hey Andres, do you find file system development interesting in Serenity? Are there any file system features in Serenity that you have really enjoyed working on? I think file systems, like many parts of Serenity, are kind of, I kind of developed them. The parts that I developed in the Serenity kernel, I sort of implemented them with the feeling of, we need this, so I have to do this. But I didn't really go the extra mile with building the file system implementation, and you can see that like quite easily if you look at it, and because you'll notice that there is no like buffer cache or like page cache or whatever you would call it, and we are pretty bad at like being lazy about things, and we're like over reading more than we need to, writing more than we need to, not sharing things, and probably not sequencing things in a very smart way, especially if you're running on spinning plate hard drives. I imagine that we would be very slow, and we kind of we're cheating a lot by piggybacking on the host kernel when you're running in QEMU. It doesn't matter if you have crappy file system access patterns in Serenity, because you get good caching from the host system outside of QEMU anyway. But I imagine on bare metal, you would quickly discover that we are doing pretty poor access patterns. And we also have a lot of things like statically sized caches. So like the whole file system cache is statically sized per hard drive, rather than being something that can grow dynamically. If you have terabytes of RAM, we should probably let you use more of that for file system caches, but we don't currently. So to answer your question, like, it's something that it was fun to implement, but I think I moved on a little too soon from it. It's just that I had a million things that I needed to stand up. So once the file system was kind of working enough to load programs, I just moved on to the next thing. And I mean, this was years ago now, of course, but in many ways, like, there are a lot of things in the system that I built to be quite simple. And it's not that I thought, oh, they should never be more advanced than this. It's just that I just moved on to something else because I had a million things to stand up. So perhaps rather than doing fixed meat roulettes, maybe a more, I don't know, like a more constructive use of the same type of idea would be to sort of go back and make some of the like more simple parts of the system a bit more sophisticated. Maybe it's time to revisit some things like that. Anyway, Milan, thank you very much for supporting the channel. Enjoy the golden yak and other emotes. Let's see. SS Developer said, do you think there will ever be any hardware accelerated graphics in Serenity? I would guess the answer would be a not anytime soon. Actually, the answer is it can be as soon as you want. If you start working on it today, then you are in complete control of when it happens. Really, everything in Serenity happens because somebody decides to work on it. That's really the reality of when things happen in Serenity. It's when somebody works on it. I don't tell anybody what to do. Nobody tells anybody what to do. Things might happen tomorrow or never or next year. If you want to affect when things happen, the way to do that is to participate. Let's see. Andrew was asking, what feature is missing from our test infrastructure inside or outside the system? For example, in the CI YMLs that would help make the system more stable. Well, one thing that's certainly missing is accelerated emulation. And I know GitHub runners don't offer that, but like the fact that our runners are so slow, I think that is pretty sad. And certainly, like, looking ahead a little bit, when we want to start running web platform tests, I think it won't even be a choice to run them inside Serenity, at least not with the current setup, because it would just be too slow to run them all inside the TCG QEMU setup. And we really want a KVM enabled thing. But to make the system more stable, I think I don't know if it's necessarily something about our CI, but maybe it's other types of um, like things that could happen in parallel to CI. Like I know you and I talked last week briefly about um, like nightly runs of something, and you could imagine having like a stability bot that just builds Serenity and then does a bunch of stress testing, but is not part of CI, so it doesn't run on every commit or anything like that, but it would just be sort of updated regularly and then runs a bunch of stress tests and sees if we crash. And just having some kind of automatic way to surface stability issues and surface panics would be kind of interesting. Because yeah, I guess that's an issue in general, that like the the system tends to run for a very short time. Like most people don't run Serenity for hours and hours and hours. So we probably have lots of issues that only start appearing after hours of runtime, but most Serenity sessions are like 1 minute or shorter, and I would wager like very rarely above 1 hour in length. So having some kind of way to let the system run longer periods would be interesting, I think, and just finding issues. And I think that wouldn't just find like long or issues that are specific to longer uptimes, but also just have a higher chance of surfacing like random race condition type issues as well, just by being alive longer. Let's see. Jared says, I found that CMake with OS development is funky because I need to add a custom linker and bootstrap assembly. How did you deal with this? Well, the CMake setup that we have took a long time to grow, and a lot of people put a lot of time into it, and it's still definitely not perfect, and it still has awkwardness around the various custom steps, like the fact that we have to build a bunch of tools that run in the host environment before we can build the system itself. Like that just complicates the CMake setup. But if it's just like using a custom linker and bootstrapped assembly, that's not that much of a mess yet. Like if you're working on a system yourself, like that's a simple mess that you can probably clean up with some tool overrides or whatever. But as your system becomes more sophisticated, your CMake will also have to become more sophisticated. And as Andrew was saying last week, in our case, like it's like our system is more, our CMake needs are more sophisticated than our CMake skills. And I feel a bit bad about being in that situation because I don't have very strong CMake skills, and it's something that I guess I need to learn more about. Anyway, let's see. Thomas Q says the system doesn't have an killer, right? It doesn't have an killer, but it also doesn't. We don't overcommit in the same way that Linux does. So if you try to allocate memory that we don't have, then the allocation will fail. So there's a sort of a synchronous kill that happens if you don't handle that allocation failure. And a lot of the work that we've been doing recently, and a lot of people have been pitching in, is in being better at handling memory allocation errors, so that we don't necessarily like choke the whole application because you couldn't allocate memory. And I remain optimistic that it is possible to handle out of memory situations in a graceful way. And I want to see if this experiment in like rigorous propagation of allocation failures can succeed. But it's like we still have a lot of work to do, And then we also have a lot of work to do. Even like after we do all the work of propagating the errors, we also need to do the work of like handling those errors at good points and presenting UI saying like, oh, we can't do this operation because you don't have enough memory, or there other things that might be reasonable, like maybe sometimes you don't want to show UI, but instead one thing I was thinking about is that if you are doing a bunch of operations in an image editor and you don't have enough memory to put more entries on the undo stack, then you can either like throw out the oldest entry in the undo stack, or you can like flush old stuff on the undo stack from memory to disk and things like that. There are a bunch of different strategies, and I think there's a lot of interesting programming problems in that area. So I am looking forward to digging into some of those. Let's see. Lucas says, I'm for longer thinking about building a Bluetooth stack. Last time I looked, unfortunately, USB doesn't look ready to do it. Do you know the current state of USB? I am not super current on the USB implementation. I think Jesse and Black Cat have been sort of poking at UHCI support, so I think we're still in USB 1 territory, and to my knowledge they've got some basic device communication up, but I don't think anybody had like human interface devices working and stuff like that. So it is pretty bare bones, would be my lazy assessment of the situation. Now, if you want to, if you need stronger USB stack for something you want to do, one of the best things you can do is to improve our USB stack. That would definitely be encouraged. It doesn't have a ton of active development, so there's definitely room for activity. Let's see. Ryan Cohen said, thank you for the answer. I find file system implementations really interesting, especially on bare metal. It's something I've been meaning to mess around with in Serenity. Yeah, so our main file system right now is ext2, and there's just a million things you can do to improve the general experience. Like one thing would be adding journaling support so that we can do ext3 instead. That would be a huge improvement. And there's also stuff like, adding other file systems could be neat. I know our ISO 9660 file system has a bunch of missing features like long file names and stuff like that. And FAT was recently added. I'm sure there are more things to improve. And there are, of course, other file systems that we don't support at all that maybe we should support. Who knows? But yeah, definitely strong encouragement to mess around. Dami Killer says, happy holidays, Andreas, and the rest of the community. Happy holiday to you too, Dami Killer. Very, very happy holidays to everybody. Let's see. Alex K says, from an aesthetic viewpoint, do you feel like Serenity should have some of the more modern UI effects, like animations, transparency, wobbly windows? I don't know. I think I would say wobbly windows, no, that's a bit silly. And I was just as impressed with wobbly windows as everybody else when the first version of Compiz came out. That was rad, but I don't think that wobbly windows are a great benefit to a UI. Animations and transparency and things like that, I think when used sparingly and for effect, I think they can be fantastic. So I definitely like the idea of like tasteful use of subtle opacity effects and animation stuff, but I definitely don't want to do anything that makes the system feel slower than it needs to be. So you should never ever feel like you're waiting for an animation. If that ever happens, then I think you've messed up. But as long as things are real snappy and you never feel like you're waiting for something, then I think there is room for things like that. But keyword being sparing and like tasteful. Let's see. Attila says, "Hi. Was there ever any intention or effort to support, even in addition to CMake, any other build system? Of course, Meson comes to mind." So we've gone through a few different setups for the build system. And CMake is the current and I guess the longest lasting iteration. And there isn't really anything terribly wrong with our setup now as far as I'm concerned, other than like, yeah, there's a lot of things that could be improved, but I don't think it's like fundamentally broken in some way that can't be fixed. But that could also be me not having a complete picture of everything that's wrong with our CMake setup. I think if something like Meson, for example, would make maintaining our build system easier, then that's something that somebody could prototype and prove. We do have a lot of things going on in our build system, so and I don't know the half of it anymore because there's a lot of stuff that happens during our build process that I've never even investigated how it works. Like a lot of the Unicode stuff, for example, that Tim has built, I'm barely aware of how that works. So I think for supporting some other build system, there would be a considerable task to port all of the all of the code generation systems and things that we have. And without a prototype, it's hard to say if it's like something worth supporting. Let's see. Jack Delahunt says, when the language server asks the compiler where a definition of a type is, do you traverse the typed AST or do you save all the types somewhere? I don't know. Are you asking about if you're asking about language server for Yacht, then we parse. So I guess it's a traversal. But if you're asking about the language servers in Serenity, I don't remember how they're implemented. I haven't looked at them enough. So we would need to ask Itamar or Ali or somebody who's worked on the Serenity language servers. But I think they probably traverse an AST as well. Let's see. Attila says, the issue of first having to build native tools you just described is a common one, and Meson handles it naturally. Well, that's cool. I think with things like that, like CMake handles it pretty nicely as well. With things like this, the devil is always in the details, right? You have to actually like dig in and try to do everything that we do to see if it really is still natural, because there's a bunch of stupid details. Let's see. Jack Delahunt says, what differs from ext2 and other file systems like ext3 and what Windows uses? I guess that's more of a question for Google than for me, but the main difference in features from ext2 to ext3 was that ext3 added journaling. I think that was the primary new feature. And journaling is basically a way that metadata is written into a journal and before it's applied to the file system. And then if you were to, say, lose power, you can use that metadata journal to sort of fix up the file system so that it's after reboot, like you can use the metadata journal to fix up the file system. Anything that broke can be repaired and within limits, but it basically makes the system a lot more robust in the face of power failures or random corruptions. Let's see. Nalis Niku says, hello, a fellow North dweller here. Would you accept a Christmas gift? I build open source network routers and would love to send you one with a Serenity logo engraved into the enclosure. I guess I could accept that. That sounds kind of fun. Get in touch with me on Discord or email, and we can talk about that. Sufiane says, hey Andreas, how's the weather like down there? Down there. Does that mean that you're up there? Well, down here, the weather is, and this is where I reveal myself to be a massive indoor dweller, because now I have to look at my phone to see how the weather is like. It's -1 degree Celsius outside. So it's just below freezing temperature. But it's been up and down. Like a week ago, we had something like -12 degrees Celsius, and it was pretty gnarly. And it is getting, it's been getting a bit warmer. So now we're hovering around freezing temp. Unfortunately, there isn't very much snow yet, so I'm hoping that that will come, because I do love the snow. Motoyuki says, throughout your career, what do you think about the relationship between good hackers and their smartness, which is measured by IQ, etc. in this context? Good hackers and smartness. I think if any good hacker is going to be smart. And not every smart person is a good hacker, but it's definitely the case that like good hackers tend to be pretty smart people. But there's also a thing that you see a lot, which is somebody is a good hacker and they're smart, and they get into this idea that means that they're also smart in every other aspect of life. And I think a funny example of that somebody told me was that and somebody who's a very smart person told me that he got into chess, and he found it difficult to understand why he sucked so much at chess because he's so smart and he's a strong programmer, but like he never really studied chess or played a lot of chess, and he just expected to be good at it, but he wasn't. And I think I've seen a lot of that with programmers who just think that because they've mastered something like as complicated as computers, they are going to be automatically great at everything else. And yeah, I've definitely stepped into that trap when I was younger. At some point, I learned that it's better to be quiet when you don't know about something, or to maybe even say that I don't know. But it took me a long time to figure that out. I think a lot of people are still figuring that out. It might also be an age thing, of course. See, Rodrigo says, hi Andreas, are you taking a Christmas break? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, sometimes I feel like, what am I going to do on a break? Because the main thing I want to do when I'm relaxing is to do some relaxing programming. But it would probably be the responsible thing to do, to take a little bit of a break, and do something else, like go outside, maybe see the weather with my own eyes instead of seeing it in the iOS weather app. Daft Duck says, check the time, thanks and happy days. The time is indeed 5:03, and that means I do have to go. So thank you all for coming to SerenityOS office hours. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, so I do wish everybody a super happy Christmas holiday, and I hope that you will have a merry time, or whatever the equivalent is where you are. It was really nice to see everybody. Thank you all for the comments, questions, fun conversation. Welcome to the Yak Herd, the people who joined. And if you end up programming this Christmas, then come hang out on the Serenity Discord, and we can share the fun. And now I have to actually bring up this thing to turn off the stream. So see you all next time. Bye. Merry Christmas.